welcome to our lunchtime conversation, which is Local Interests, Global Bridges, Redefining Infrastructure Investments. As I have been kindly introduced, my name is Lila Bancuti-Balog, and I serve as head of the Center for Global Economy at Matthias Corvinus Collegium. And today's session explores one of the most complex and dynamic areas of international cooperation, which is the financing of physical and digital infrastructure. As the global economy evolves, sustainable connectivity, both physical and digital, has become a key driver of growth and community empowerment. Yet, infrastructure finance is increasingly shaped by geopolitical competition. Today, in the roundtable, we will explore how global powers use connectivity as a strategic tool and how local interests can be protected in this shifting landscape. So the key question that we ask here today is how can we finance sustainable connectivity while safeguarding national autonomy and local priorities? So here is how we will proceed. We will begin with targeted questions to each of our distinguished speakers, and after about 45 minutes of discussion, we'll open the floor to audience Q&A, and this is where each speaker will also have an option to share their closing reflections. So let us begin with our first round of questions, and I will turn to Sarah first. My question to you would be that as a venture investor focused on emerging technologies, what role do startups and early stage innovations play in reshaping global infrastructure? And particularly, how can financing models be designed to scale these innovations without creating geopolitical dependencies?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah. I'm from San Francisco, Silicon Valley, so I'm going to talk about startups from the Silicon Valley perspective. As we know, more startups is equal to more innovation, and we can have more startups when we have more money to back up the startup. But as you can see in a lot of different cities that are not part of Silicon Valley, they put a lot of money in the ecosystem, but still they couldn't be the same as Silicon Valley. And one of the reasons that it didn't work because we have the ecosystem that nobody has. And one of the most important things that we need to do when it comes to infrastructure is like how we can get the startups that start in the infrastructure world to have the right mentors. With the startups that we have in Silicon Valley, the ones that are really successful are the ones that have the right people on the board. You can have the best technology, but if you don't have the right people on the board that can sometimes change the policies for you or bring the right people to invest, you can never get from the startup to the growth. And that's the mistakes that I see in different cities that Silicon Valley do really well because we attract the best of the world. So in terms of infrastructure, it's very hard to start from early stage to growth. It's not like, a lot of other companies in AI, you can just start from very early stage and then invest and then go to the next level. Infrastructure really need the right people. What we do in Silicon Valley, we actually invest on people that are not experienced. They're young, but we back them with the right people that have the experience. So they bring the youth and they bring the inexperienced CEOs, but that mentorship is extremely important. So I would say for infrastructure, I haven't seen startups that have the right mentor. Even in Silicon Valley, we don't have that. We don't focus that much on infrastructure. One of the examples that it's not really infrastructure, but it can be seen as an infrastructure is Uber, for example. It changed the infrastructure of transportation, but when Uber started, I was actually, looking at a lot of deals, and there was like thousands of similar startups that were having the same technology. But the reason that Uber became Uber because they had the right people on the board. So I would say like we really need to like find that ecosystem in infrastructure, ecosystem of startup, and young people who just started a new startup to be able to connect with the right mentor.
My next question would be to Alim Nazar. Given your Central Asian perspective, what are some local strategies to engage with global infrastructure initiatives like the China's Belt and Road Initiative or the EU's Global Gateway, while preserving, of course, national interests?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, dear moderator, the Budapest dialogue organizers, distinguished guests, and the attendees of this panel. First of all, thank you very much inviting me to give a speech, an opportunity to share my opinions with you. And I think now let me say my opinions and my findings about the first question. At the moment, for the developing countries, infrastructure projects are not only a factor of economic development, and also it is main tool of the geopolitics. For example, the Economics Journal reported that China, by the initiative One Belt, One Road, funded the projects about $1 trillion in the more than 150 countries of the world. For this reason, the external debt of the countries increased. At the same time, today the world is not enough sufficient. So the countries, after the failing to repay the loan, they must pay by mineral resources, with land, and etc. For example, Sri Lanka was forced to lease the port of Hambantota for 99 years. It failed to repay its loans from China. What we have to do? First, it is very important to diversify the funding resources. The Asian countries realizing the infrastructure projects with Japan, South Korea, European Union on an equal partnership basis. For example, JICA allocated $1.5 billion to finance Vietnam's metro infrastructure, subway infrastructure project. The second is to develop national infrastructure strategy of each country. It's very important, especially for developing countries. For example, when I prepare to this speech, I looked very many reports of the world, and I find that Rwanda adopted Vision 2050 strategy. And if look at this strategy, one of the priority directions of the infrastructure projects and all the external funding adapting to national strategy. The third one is to maintain policy of geopolitical neutrality. Our neighbor country, Kazakhstan, to receive financial resources for its infrastructure projects from Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, China, US, Japan, and would like to show a neutral regional actor in Central Asia. Such kind of approach gives to priority to the national interests of the Kazakh people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, moving on to Ardian, what are some lessons that can be drawn particularly from the Western Balkans experience in negotiating those kind of infrastructure deals that have been talked about? Are there examples of successful contract structures that balanced external funding with some of the local priorities that you had?
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm really happy that you asked me this question because the Western Balkans, where I come from Albania, it's this kind of overlapping territory where we have the Global Gateway, the Belt and Road, and probably the IMEC. Stefania, maybe, I mean, one of your maps or scenarios goes there. So we have something to show. I mean, it's the kind of specificity that makes this region very, very interesting. And I will start by saying, I mean, that I will put myself at the point of view of a researcher. We have been working with connectivity projects since almost 10 years right now, and we organize every year Tirana Connectivity Forum. So basically we deal with this mostly on the transport. With regard to this question, I want to bring up first what we call this connectivity trilemma. Because with an infrastructure project, with a big one, and those infrastructure projects are quite big actually, we have to bring together the geopolitical imperatives, the financial viability of the project, and also the needs to support local development. So basically, these three imperatives, they do not go always hand in hand naturally. They need to kind of fit together. The second point that I would like to bring from our research is this distribution of risk versus the agency. And here, in an infrastructure project, we have different actors. We have the host country, which is the government. We stay with the government for the moment. We have, well, in the Western Balkans, we have the European Union. We have the international financial institutions. We have the developer, which may be the national railway company or the road company. We have the contractor, and we have the communities, the end beneficiaries. So at least, let's say, 5 actors. I would like you to think who of those actors have the highest agency, but with 0 risk. We have found, yes, highest agency, 0 risk, that the actors with the highest agency, 0 risk, are the international financial institutions. For the reason that they have a very strong say in preparing the, let's say, feasibility studies. They finance the feasibility studies and the technical design of the project very often. And when they give the grant to the national beneficiary, the loan, all their loans are backed by sovereign guarantees. So basically, they don't lose any cent. Okay? So huge agency, 0 risk. I will reverse the question. Who has the highest risk but 0 agency? Well, I mean, it's 1:30, so I will give the answer as well. When we said the host country, in the host country we do not have the host country, it doesn't exist. We have different interests. So, but if we keep the government that negotiates these contracts and the local communities or the citizens, is that the local communities and the citizen, that they take all the risk, because whatever happens with the project they will pay, but they do not have too much agency. Normally they should have it through their politicians, but in the development countries, the politicians have a tendency to stay for decades in power, so. I will bring here as well another 120 seconds, please bear with me. Also some modalities of the financing in the Western Balkans that may be interesting for the Global Gateway or for the IMEC in this case. We have the financing of the projects has normally 3 components. The first one, it's the grant component. We are the Western Balkans is part of the Trans-European Network, or the TEN-T it's called. So the infrastructure projects that are happening in this region can be financed through a grant component by the EU that goes up to 50%, which means that 50% of the project will be a gift. We are not obliged to pay it back. The rest of the 50%, it's made up by the EBRD, European Bank of Investment, KfW, all these development agencies and banks. Now there is a very strong component of PPPs or public-private partnerships, especially in Albania, that is taking is developing a lot. So this is the other part of the financing, and I will finish with an example. We have studied a couple of years ago Trans-Adriatic pipeline. Does it ring a bell? It brings Azeri gas to south of Italy. It has been a very successful project. It has been a very successful project. 1.2 billion euros. Only, an important part going through Albania under the Adriatic Sea to Italy. And here. One of the reasons why it was successful for the local actors, because the Swiss government provided, I think, a 7 million euros grant to the Albanian government to properly negotiate with the top developers, because we did not have the expertise to deal with it. We did not know how to negotiate the contracts. So this was very, very useful. We saved some good money in it. For the EU projects, there is EU technical assistance that is financed by the EU money, that helps also our institutions to overcome this capacity of the local institutions to negotiate the contracts, prepare the designs, implement them, even the supervision, etc., etc. And there are plenty of anecdotes about these projects, but I will not abuse it with my time for the moment.
Thank you very much. Since Ardian has been mentioning this asymmetry that is there between the risk and the agency at different levels, maybe, Stephanie, you could give us some examples in the international disputes that you have mediated, that what are some recurring legal issues that you see in those infrastructure contracts, and how can host countries better protect themselves from those kind of hidden clauses or asymmetrical obligations that Adrian has talked about?
Thanks. I think I'll take this also from a geopolitical lens. Having worked for two former foreign ministers over half a decade, I was quite close to some of these issues. And it's been touched on in various ways by different panelists. But one of the big risks with infrastructure projects when they're being funded by another country is you want to make sure that, especially when you're dealing with critical infrastructure, that you're not compromising your sovereignty, just flat out. So, and the way that you do that, there can be hidden clauses, but you've got to go in eyes wide open. And so that's why you've got Global Gateway and IMEC, for example, countering the BRI regime. One issue with BRIs, well, two. Firstly, debt for equity swaps, big issue there, and you raised on it as well, the 99-year sort of port lease. The trouble with that is if the developing country doesn't pay it back, then that's just a straight debt for equity swap. They take over the infrastructure, and when it comes to a port, that's critical infrastructure. That is not necessarily what you want from a geopolitical perspective. So that's a massive risk. And then beyond that, I think one way of understanding whether what you're entering into is potentially going to be in your interests is, check concessionality, like are the loan terms, OECD, in line with OECD standards, or for example, another issue. Well, a good thing, I'll mention a positive. A good thing with Global Gateway is that it's quite transparent, so that you don't want debt for equity swaps and you want transparency. So when dealing with a partner country who's proposing to fund the infrastructure, especially where it's critical, you want to look at what they've done before. And so usually you should have like a transparent list of projects. Global Gateway has that, right? So that's a clear indication. If there isn't a transparent list of projects, we found that was an issue with BRIs, for example, that there isn't. And so it means that there's a massive lack of accountability. You can't point to where things have gone wrong, and you can't sort of trace it or track it because there's not a transparent list sort of necessarily out there. So that's a massive risk. But from the arbitration perspective, and broader risk levels would be for the foreign investor. So you want to make sure that you're your country is sort of properly managing their sovereign risk, but at the same time balancing that with say you've got a foreign investor then funding partially as opposed to the nation itself, you want to check the ISDS regime, so investor state dispute settlement. And so it's quite interesting when it comes to IMEC because India's actually pulled a lot of their bilateral investment treaties. They took the view that they weren't necessarily in the host state, i.e. India's interests. So as a country, you want, and when advising governments, you really need to look not just at the project itself or the financing contract, you need to look at the investment regime that sits above that, and that's the bilateral investment treaties. And as for India right now, there's massive gaps there, but they will see that as protecting their country and their country's ability to legislate in the public interest. So when advising governments, I would say to the government, protect your ability to legislate as well. And I won't labour this point, it may come out later, but there's lots of ways nationally in legislation that you can then seek to protect those interests, and you'll have to cross-check it with the investor state dispute settlement clause. But usually now these days there's a carve-out, so you can legislate, where it deals with, legitimate health interests, etc.
So, since Stephanie had mentioned the problematic nature of debt for equity swaps, especially then regarding critical infrastructure, and of course we could mention mineral resources, lands and ports and so on, I'm directing my question now to Alim Nazar, that what do you think some coordination mechanisms across ministries, regional actors, technical agencies that can help ensure that those national infrastructure strategies remain coherent and effective in this challenging geopolitical landscape?
Thank you again. Dear attendees, please let me answer to the questions. The reason is that developing countries mostly not have enough experience to international relations. I mean, to sign international contracts, or they have not enough opportunity to analyze the financial contracts, which are written down with the difficult juridical languages. It's very difficult to understand what it means. So, for example, by the Global Witness Report for 2021 year, reported that Democratic Republic of Congo signed a contract with China for the infrastructure projects of the mining for the $6 billion. After that, by the hidden clauses and bans of the contract, 60% of the income has gone out from the Congo. And such kind of contracts we also have. For example, Uzbekistan our government signed with the contract with the Lukoil, Russian company, and the clauses is not familiarized to the population. How many years the contracts will sign, what is the income will divided by the country, and the population is not know about this. So what we suggest, the first is to use model contracts. It's very important. It will be very useful to sign contract with standard documents of the, for example, United Nations Commission of International Trade Law, or Natural Resource Governance Institute, or Future of Identity in the Information Society. These organizations and give the standard models of the contract. The second is to establish independent legal audit. In each country, for example, must have international independent legal audit, not government, not the parliament, and etc. For example, when I learned that Botswana revises each treaty enough a special legal council that protects its sovereignty. And the third is openness to the society and parliament control. It's very important. For example, in Ghana and Peru, the infrastructure projects which amount are more than $1 million must be adopted by the parliament. It's also very important to familiarize the population about the international contracts with developing countries, with the developed countries, with the, for example, financial institution, World Financial Institute is very important. The fourth is to establishing terms of adding local value with investors. It's very important. For example, in Nigeria, an agreement to implement an infrastructure projects in the oil sector requires investors to carry out 35% of production with local production companies. So it is my answers to your question. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Those are some very tangible examples indeed. And this made me wonder if Ardian can contribute with his views on how, after financing is secured, how can those recipient countries maintain the transparency and the accountability in project delivery? Like, are there any examples of monitoring tools or contract clauses that can help to ensure that commitments are actually being met?
This would be an exception or a singularity. Because with the work that we have done, we haven't seen too much. Normally, in our region, a lot of those contracts are, let's say, passed with a special law, or they have secrecy clauses. So it's impossible to get hold of them. So this is a big problem. They do not follow the general rules of procurement of public goods. So that's quite a big problem. But at the end of the day, this is not what bothers me, because when it comes, if we have to, tender a railway line, 120 million euros, and when the tender is published, the notice for tender is published, it is cooked. Okay, that's done, it's too late. We need to have transparency and engagement and involvement from the moment of the project identification. Why we need a road and not a railway, for example, why we need a railway and not 3 hospitals. Why we need 3 hospitals and not 55 schools? I don't know. This kind of transparency in every stage. We put the accent on the procurement. I think this is misleading. It's very important, but it's misleading. We need to be transparent from the moment that the project is identified. And this is why we insist in our recommendations that those projects that are identified for financing are taken from this single project pipeline list. So, which is a list of the most important infrastructure projects of a certain country, ranked by important and by maturity, by strategic importance and maturity. And those projects must be taken by this list, because this is a very reliable list. When you see another project that comes in for financing, which is not in this list, it means that, how to say it, different powers have lobbied for this project to be there. And I will stop here. Can I take this opportunity to bring some other points, or?
Yeah, please do so.
Great, cool. Given that we are part of it was very important, this idea of how we can coordinate between different countries, because for the small countries, you cannot build a road that stops at the border. It's impossible. So we need to coordinate with the other countries that are across the border. But here we are lucky, because we are part of this since 2024, last year. We are part of this European network map of corridors. So we know what will happen on the other side. And it's coordinated at the regional level, but with the EU support, which is very, very important. Thank you, EU. I feel like I'd say this. Another point is that we need to use this grant component. This infrastructure has up to 50% an EU grant. We need to use this grant component to increase the local content of this project. Basically, what the communities that are separated in 2 by this railway or this 4-carriage road, what they will get out of it. We connect to big cities, but the fields and the villages and the communities that we split, So it needs to have a capacity built for the communities, and what's even hugely important, a good governance contribution for the institutions. Trans-Adriatic Pipeline managed to change the mentality of the Albanian worker. Can you believe it? In 4 years. And I have examples for that. Changing the mentality of a Balkan person. I am the proof. It's very difficult. So, something else, because there are a lot of finance people here around. Guys, you know that in the Albanian banks there are, I'd say, at least 7 billion euros in saving accounts, giving 1.2% something per year. If there is a way to mobilize this saving for infrastructure projects, I think it will be huge. And I'm talking only about the money in the bank accounts, not under the mattress. I think it may be twice as big. Okay, this is the first round of the anecdotes. I will continue if you have more time.
Although I would love to progress with changing the mentality of a Balkan person, but I'm going to reflect on transparency and the involvement that you have mentioned, and I will come back to Sarah later, but first I would like to ask Stephanie that in your experience with international contracting, what are some practical legal features, clauses, arbitration options that can strengthen the negotiating position of host countries from the outset on, so from the start of the negotiations?
Sure. Okay, so for the first part, I think at the outset, one common theme that's come out in the panel is that developing countries are significantly at a disadvantage, and that's true because often they struggle to find the right experts, and that is a huge problem. We tend to find that in, for example, Australia, in my experience, we would support other countries in the region that are smaller than us, and we would support them in a way that you know, and that can, you know, come in the form of multilateral engagement. So, for example, we might support them as part of a formal grouping of, you know, a legal grouping, and then we all work on common problems in the region. And then they can take sort of away from that what they will in terms of infrastructure projects as well. But I guess more critical, because it's you know, it's actually on so many different areas. You know, it can be like law of the sea and that kind of thing. That's a very big focus, especially with sea rise. So, and that is going to affect their critical infrastructure. So that's huge. But separate to that, more on the infrastructure financing side of what we're discussing now, making sure that they're equipped with the right negotiation tools is extremely important. So, quite like you mentioned, that's incredible that the Swiss funded those experts for Albania, to the tune of 7 million? Yeah, so that's really incredible. We have in arbitration and various different, speaking aside from government, like we've got Trade Lab, which actually was set up in Geneva in like 2015. And so that's really good because it involves international experts like myself in international law, and we then basically, it's a program through which experts then are able to advise developing nations on, you know, critical questions. So that's one other option that they have, but, you know, probably not the first option if we're talking about something as important as critical infrastructure. And as you mentioned, within the particular contracts, there can be secrecy clauses, and that's, you know, that's not uncommon for various projects to not be released publicly in terms of the specificities of the contracts. But what should be released publicly, I believe, if you're talking about whether it's Global Gateway, IMEC, or even BRI, and it's not the case as I've mentioned, we do need to have those lists so that you can have accountability. That is really important. But if we're talking in the technicalities of particular clauses, the first one that comes to mind, especially with IMEC and what's going on in the Middle East, would be the force majeure clause. So obviously you want a clause that is going to protect your rights if you know there's a reason why something can't go ahead. And the trouble with a lot of these, you know, projects like the Gulf Railway, and other like projects, that there are so many geopolitical risks. And so sometimes, they might take decades, and then there'll be setback as well. So you really want a contract that's going to protect you in that sense. But as I said, it also comes back to the regime that's above that in terms of the investment arbitration regime. That's going to be quite critical, because if a state pulls out, then you're going to fall back on those clauses. But of course, the project clauses are important too. And then it comes down to a question of trust as well between the relevant parties.
Thank you very much. As a closing question to Sarah, we have been talking a lot about the public side and the national side of these infrastructure contracts, but given the growing use of blended finance and infrastructure, how can we ensure or design mechanisms that attract mission-aligned private capital while ensuring flexibility and innovation at the local level? And also, what are some of the lessons that the public can learn from the venture world in terms of public policy?
Well, one thing that we didn't mention when it comes to venture capital is we are actually creating the biggest infrastructure, the future infrastructure, which is AI. We are financing the VCs of Silicon Valley, the future of infrastructure in AI, which means that we're going to have access to education, even as you mentioned, brainwashing, if you want to change the mind of people, all of that through...
I did not mention brainwashing. I use this word, I meant change.
Change, yeah, but we can do it with AI, the brainwashing part. So, we affect the education, we will affect the way that the new generation will think. And also the future of war can well be war on data centers, because AI will have so much power that, like, if you want to have a war with another country, you probably want to target their data center more than humans. They're probably more important in the future. So right now, the only countries that have access to that infrastructure is mostly USA and China. And we have seen even in Middle East that, Dubai gave access to OpenAI chat to all of their people to use it. And when I saw that news myself as an American, I was like, that's terrible, because the new generation is going to have American culture, not really the Middle Eastern culture. So the question here is, like, this kind of infrastructure that will be the future of infrastructure, how we can make sure that has the sovereignty of each nation, how we can make sure we still keep the culture of that nation and not Americanized the whole world with the education that comes from the US. I mean, China, as you know, they have their own, and they're trying to have influence through their own AI. But so far, USA and we are by far the best when it comes to AI. So I think when we talk about infrastructure, about bridges and things, that is important, but like in the future, infrastructure will be mostly who has access to the AI. And I would love for the audience to also talk about that in the questions and see what you think the future of AI is going to look like in terms of infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think this is a perfect last comment to spark the interest of our audience, as we are now opening up the floor to questions from the audience. And when you ask your questions, I kindly do introduce yourself with just your name and organizational affiliation, and please keep your questions brief so as many people can ask the questions that they want. And I would also like to ask our panelists that keep your response to about 2 minutes each, and feel free to put in any closing thoughts or key messages that you would like to leave here with us today.
Good afternoon. I'm Ana Miguel dos Santos, a former member of the European Parliament and also of the Portuguese Parliament. But sorry, I just want to highlight, and probably had a comment, view, because you mentioned a thing that it's really very important, because AI is the infrastructure of the future, that's for sure. But and you talk about brainwashing, and I'm very connected and related with this thought. I think it's very important, and we need to be very aware of this. And the question is that because the culture, and you mentioned the culture, because the person who are creating, programming the AI reflects a culture. And this is a way of spreading this, and we need to be very, very aware of that. So yes, sorry, I just want to mention this. Thank you.
Can I ask Ali Mazar whether or not this consideration of the digital public infrastructure or digital consumer products is a consideration of the region, maybe for Albania or Australia as well, whether or not this is part of the legal framework or conversation for protecting sovereignty at this stage, or whether or not that's something that maybe is a horizon issue. Thank you.
Well, I'll start for Australia. I think we're not doing as much as we should when it comes to AI, 100%. And the future of work is going to change immensely, which is going to have massive impact on our, I guess, employment as we know it, whether it's goods or services, particularly services. So no, we're definitely not doing as much as we should. In terms of AI infrastructure and the point that you make that digital infrastructure is critical, yeah, I tend to agree. I think that, when you look at the EU Global Gateway, one of their focuses is on digital, and that makes sense, and we have to. And when it comes to culture and culture appropriation, by almost acquiescence, right? I mean, if we're not investing in AI, then that's effectively what's going to happen. Now, for a country like Australia, you might say we're more like, but we Australians would say that we're very much not like America, because we pride ourselves in being unique. But I know that the rest of the world might not view it exactly like that. But obviously we share a lot, being a similar democracy and all of that. But I tend to agree with the concern about sovereignty on AI. I think that's a real one. And beyond that, Australia, we should, because we're on a completely different time zone, we have so much to offer when it comes to services, and when it comes to even, our capability is, we have similar capabilities, not in terms of the infrastructure because we haven't invested in it, but we have the ability to be like, a quasi sort of US-like AI hub, but on a different time zone. So even better, basically. And when it comes to energy, we have our own energy issues, and I think we can't talk about AI without talking about energy. It would be like we'd be in this fanciful world if we were not looking at the grid. For us, we have our own grid issues. So without going into them, but just to say that we need to get the grid right. And that's why in the last election, there were talks about, do we need to now go forward and look at nuclear, because AI is going to require so much more power. And are we fit for that? Are we ready? So quick answer, no, we're not ready on any of those fronts. Sadly, we are not investing as much as we should in AI. A preparedness in terms of the digital landscape of work, and then obviously the energy required to power that AI investment.
Thank you for the question. Uzbekistan, we have adopted a development digital economic 2030 strategy we have now. The strategy adopted 2018. So at that time, we haven't any idea about AI. Now in the last 2 years, AI is very popular in the world and in our country also. And we are realizing this strategy 2030 by using AI. At the moment, in each project For example, it may be infrastructure project, maybe it is a social project. For example, we use the AI in our projects. Thank you.
Question. Did you know that Albania has blocked TikTok? It's, I think, among the very few countries that blocked TikTok. You didn't you? Well, it has blocked it. It blocked it because it was justified by the fact that during, a kid was killed because some, let's say, kid at school, because, some TikTok videos, etc., etc. So to protect the youth, the TikTok was stopped, but it appeared afterwards that they have communicated through WhatsApp, not through TikTok, those kids. So why do I say this? Is that sometimes, AI or TikTok or this kind of, let's say, social platforms are used to, let's say, for other goals other than the official goal for which are stated. It reminds me when I was a kid in Tirana, we could see only Albanian TV from 6 to 10 o'clock. We couldn't see Italian or Yugoslav or whatever. Now we can see everything. We get even worse news than Tirana TV. Why I bring this up? Because I believe that AI can be a force for good, but it needs to be democratized in the sense that I'm not an AI specialist, but I want to use it. I want to use it to monitor infrastructure projects, for example. I want to use it even for people that have no idea about how a road, a bridge, or railway, or an airport is constructed, to get some information that is easily understandable about those things and affect his life. But I have never seen until now an, let's say, society-owned AI. ChatGPT was mentioned a little bit like it was for the good of society. We all know how it turned up to be. But I think that if it's democratized, even you have the very small projects. Full disclosure, I like consulting DeepSeek because it gives me another opinion, it's not Western based, or Gemini, etc., etc. I asked the same question to 4 different programs. So let's have a program which is done by not-for-profits, different not-for-profits. So I think it will be a good thing. We should fight for the good of society at some point at the end of the day.
I think we have time for one more audience question.
Perhaps one, if I may. Philip Sieger from MCC Brussels. Reflecting on the things that Sarah and audience said about financing large, other small startups that have large ideas and create then really large, not industrial, but productive base for AI, or infrastructure projects that are more publicly planned, let's say. Arjen, you spoke about the high agency, zero risk role that international financial institutions play in that regard. So if we think about cutting that out because it creates adverse risk behavior, what would be alternatives to that financing? So 2 components. One, you spoke about the savings that are in Albania, which are much higher than I honestly would have expected, the 7 billion without the mattress reserves. And is there something about the Silicon Valley financing model that could be interesting to have another approach, or would it be a similar risk just from other actors? Thank you.
I believe that the concept of development bank needs to evolve to adapt to the 21st century. And I will say, this is all what I will say, at least in public. Regarding the investors, Silicon Valley investors, I think they are this concept of venture capital or risk taking. I think it's hugely important, because not only because of the money that they bring. I don't know when was the last time you've been to Tirana? Never. Oh, you'll come Tirana. You'll make no difference between some very advanced capital city in United States or in Europe. There is a lot of money around. We don't need the EU money. What we absolutely need, like the water, it's EU good governance rules. and standards and norms, these kind of things, and institutions. This is what we need. So if the Silicon Valley colleagues can bring us the best norms and rules of business development or risk-taking, if Hungarian, German construction companies, Portuguese ones, they bring the best technical rules of road making, rail, rolling stock, whatever, if the Swiss bankers bring us the best and most updated rule of how to manage money, we're perfect. I mean, we have Europe in Tirana, no need to go in rainy Brussels, and eat choux de Bruxelles or whatever they eat, So this is what we need. And if we can mobilize this capital, I started with this, I think it will also be a very good answer to the debt crunch now that is kind of limiting a little bit the space of action of both many member states and of the European Union. There is plenty of money. We need to be smart, to identify it and mobilize it for good projects.
Yeah, I will add that too. As I mentioned before, I think money is not a problem in many places, but the people. So what we do really well in Silicon Valley, we attract the best of the best. Like if you are the best in anything in tech or even infrastructure, you move to Silicon Valley. And how we can actually get those people to come to different countries. We are creating bridges right now with a lot of countries in the world, but we really need to help countries, and the countries need to come to us, not only for money, but also mostly for advice and how we can help them to build the infrastructure, and how they can build their own AI infrastructure without using the American ones all the time. For now, it's mostly American AI. So that's the bridge that I really like. It's my passion to build between Silicon Valley and other countries. And if anybody can help with that, please come talk to me.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers, and thank you all for joining this important discussion. I think we have really talked in a wide variety of viewpoints, from legal, financial, public policy, of the physical and the digital infrastructure. So let's continue to think critically about how we can build not just bridges of steel, but also bridges of trust, balance, and, as we have talked about, shared values. Thank you very much for being here with us today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.